Hey everybody, Ms. Dupree here. What we're doing in this unit is we're talking about ways to use properties of matter to identify things. And we're actually going to be talking about metals, nonmetals, and metalloids today. But what I wanted to start off with is just a brief review of properties. Remember, properties are ways that we describe things. So if we have this apple, some of the properties of this apple, it's red, it's round, it has a sweet taste. I could even put it on the scale and say it has a mass of about 80 grams. I could even get the size in milliliters of this object. So those are properties. Now, there are what we call physical properties. Those is basically anything that you can measure using your senses. These are things you see, you touch, you hear, things that you put on the scale and measure. If you can actually touch it or sense it to observe it, then it's what's called a physical property. Now, sometimes properties can change. If I take that same apple and I cut it in half, what has changed about it? Well, the size is different. Now it's a lot smaller. And the mass of it's different because it's not as heavy, because you don't have as big a piece. I'm going to give you another example. If I take an ice cube and I take it out and I put it on the counter and it melts, it's still H2O, it's still water, but it's changed from a solid into a liquid. So sometimes properties can change. But there are also properties that don't change. And the important thing about these properties is they always stay the same. No matter if you have a big piece of that sample or you have a small piece, they always stay the same. So one of the things we're going to look at is properties of metals, nonmetals, and metalloids, how you can identify what sort of object you have. So before we do that, there are some important vocabulary words you need to make sure that you know. When we talk about luster, we're asking, is your material shiny or is it dull? One of the things we want to keep in mind is when we're doing these property tests, we're talking about natural materials. We're not talking about man-made materials. We're talking about things that you would find in nature. So we have shiny or dull, and those are your words about luster. Malleable and brittle. They're talking about what happens if you try to bend something or if you drop it. So if we take this paper clip's really easy to bend. I can twist it into all kinds of shapes. That's called malleable. It bends really easily. But if I take this glass or this beaker, you notice I can't bend it. And what happens if I break it on the floor? It's going to break really easily. And that's called brittle. You also need to be familiar with what a conductor is and what an insulator is. Remember, a conductor is any material that lets the heat or electricity flow through it. Like these wires are going to let the electricity come through. An insulator does not let electricity and heat through it. So if you look at this pan, this handle is an insulator. You can grab it and the heat's not going to go through the handle to burn your hand. So those are the properties that we're going to use to identify metals, nonmetals, and metalloids. Here I have a piece of aluminum, and as you can see, it's really shiny. It reflects the light very well. So when we talk about the luster, we're going to say that it's shiny. What happens if I try to bend it? It's super easy to bend. So metals are going to be malleable. And then if I take my handy-dandy conductivity tester here, which is just a battery and a Christmas light, and I touch my metal to it, you will see that we can make it light up. It takes just a second for me. There you go. So this piece of metal and all metals are going to be conductors. Now, our second category is what are called nonmetals. And here I have a small piece of what's called sulfur. Sulfur is a common mineral. It actually has kind of a bad smell. But if you look at it, you'll notice it is dull. It doesn't have any shine to it at all. So its luster is dull. If I try to break it, I actually can. I can break it right into little pieces. And if I took it and threw it on the floor and mashed a hammer on it, I could make a pile of powder. So nonmetals are going to be brittle. And then let's hook it up to our tester here. And let's see what happens. We'll put this right on the battery. And you'll see it doesn't light up. Nothing happens. It's not letting the electricity go through. So nonmetals are going to be insulators. So most of you are actually probably familiar with this. But there's a third category that's new to a lot of students. And that's what's called a metalloid. I want you to take a look at this picture. This is a substance that's called silicon. This is a lump of silicon. And when you look at it, you can tell, that's awfully shiny. It looks like a metal. But look what happens when you break it. It turns into about 1,000 pieces. It turns into crumbly powder. It's brittle, like a nonmetal. So it has some of the properties of metal, some of the properties of a nonmetal. Well, let's look at what happens with its conductor. It's what's known as a semiconductor, which means that sometimes it conducts, sometimes it insulates. At room temperature, silicon will not conduct. But if silicon gets heated or exposed to some chemicals, it will start conducting electricity. That's called a semiconductor. And in fact, because of its ability to turn the electricity on and off, silicon is used in computer chips. So to review, metalloids have the properties of both metals and nonmetals. Kind of think of them as those in between. They have the characteristics of both. And that is it for our presentation of metals, nonmetals, and metalloids. See you next time.